I guess I've been painting for a few decades now. I was in college in the 1990s and moved to California to study graduate school. At that time was really considering painting as a profession and also education. While I was there in California, I met my wife and we moved back to the Midwest. Once we moved to New London, I realized there was opportunities to be able to have studio space and to be able to work in a way that is more difficult in a bigger city where you're having to, find a studio space and have the time to work. So I have my studio in my backyard. So I started making these really large sculptural abstract paintings. Paintings on plywood, paintings on found objects. In 2017, I was awarded a Minnesota State Arts Board grant to create and study this kind of work, and I was able to drive all over Minnesota, the North Shore, southeast, southwest Minnesota, and my region, sort of southwest and central Minnesota, and really look at some of these forgotten buildings. And it's really kind of an indicator also of economy when you think about it, when you look at buildings that are going to be torn down, and there might be like a big blue tarp stretched over that building, and that blue tarp's been sitting there for 3 years and it's faded and it's torn and the wind's been whipping it around. So that's where a lot of this work is coming from, is looking at architecture, looking at faded paint or pieces of buildings that are missing, or maybe there's been a tree that used to sit next to the building and it's been swiping and scraping at the paint, and then they've since then cut the tree down, but the evidence, that trace of that mark is left. When I first was looking at architecture and looking at buildings, there's a route I take crossing Highway 71 in which there's this pole barn, and this was before I was really pursuing this project, and I would look at it and I would see that it had a certain linear quality, it had a pattern, and it had a color situation that I thought was interesting, that I might be able to lift from. So the painting that's directly behind me is from an image in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. We were driving on a kind of scouting trip, and I was looking at buildings, and I had to pull over quickly because I just saw it out of the corner of my eye, and turned around and got to somewhere where I could take photographs of it. And it's just a Morton building. I believe it's a pole shed that the manufacturers might use to display different color swatches of their siding. And so you can get a deal on the pole barn if you let them just use the remnants they have, or show the different colors of siding. So it's got brown and red and blue, like 3 different colors of brown. And I saw these stripes, and it immediately made me think about the painter Ellsworth Kelly, a mid-century painter who I was really fond of. So I've lived in big cities and I've lived in rural areas, and one of the constants as an artist is that you're always looking at your environment. Scattered among these things are going to be situations of architecture that are surprising. What I'm hopeful for is that I have many decades of painting to make. When I look at pole barns or other architecture, rural architecture, it's with an eye of sort of extracting that composition and abstracting it into something that seems like the rules of an abstraction. So there might be external logics that image has, like the proportion of black of a stripe to the other colors. And one of the things that I get anxious about or excited about is that I can't wait to see what I'll make next. I make things because I want to look at things. What's interesting and surprising is that I can't predict what it is that I'm going to want to look at. There might be a certain idea about compositional agent or a conceptual idea about how I should be looking, but I think the basis of it all is that artists want to create something in the world that they're not seeing already.
Postcards is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Additional support provided by Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies, Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien on behalf of Shalom Hill Farms, a retreat and conference center in a prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota. On the web at shalomhillfarm.org. Alexandria, Minnesota, a year-round destination with hundreds of lakes, trails, and attractions for memorable vacations and events. More information at explorealex.com. The Lake Region Arts Council's Arts Calendar, an arts and cultural heritage funded digital calendar showcasing upcoming art events and opportunities for artists in West Central Minnesota. On the web at lrac4calendar.org. Playing today's new music plus your favorite hits, 96.7 Cram. Online at 967cram.com.